One day, 3 strange men approach Abraham as he's sitting beneath an ancient tree. He prepares a meal for them, then they ask about Sarah by name and promise Abraham that she will give birth to a son in 1 year's time. Sarah was eavesdropping and laughed to herself when she heard this. And at this point, the narrator of the story suddenly reveals to the reader that the stranger speaking is actually God. God says, "Why did Sarah laugh? Is anything too hard for the Lord?" Sarah realizes she laughed at God, so she lies and says, "I didn't laugh." And God says, "Yes, you did laugh." So after these 3 strangers finish their meal, they get up and begin walking towards Sodom. God says, "Shall I hide from Abraham what I'm about to do?" And he tells Abraham that he's on his way to investigate Sodom to see if it's as bad as he's heard, and to decide whether or not he should destroy it. But Abraham questions God's judgment. Will you really sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? And God says, "If I find 50 righteous, I will spare the city." Well, how about 45? For 45, I'll spare them all. 40, I'll spare them for 40. 30, I'll spare them for 30. 20, I'll spare them for 20. 10, I'll spare them all for 10. At that, Abraham is finally satisfied, thinking that surely there must be 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham and God then go their separate ways. Now this chapter, Genesis 18, is a very ancient section of the Bible. It's so ancient, in fact, that different versions of the story pop up all around the ancient world, including in different Arab and Bedouin cultures. But even the ancient Greeks have their own version of these events, which dates from around 1500 BC. Now in the Greek version, the gods Zeus and Hermes come down in human form to walk among the people and visit a certain city to see if these people are as friendly as they have heard. But when Zeus and Hermes arrive, everyone in the entire city refuses them any sort of hospitality, except for a very old man named Philemon and his very old wife, who give them all the food they have. The couple and the gods share some laughs together, and as the old couple is pouring out the last of the flour never runs out. They then realize that they are in the presence of the gods and bow down. Zeus and Hermes then say, "Shall we hide from Philemon what we are about to do?" And they tell them that they are going to rain down fire from heaven and destroy the wicked people of the city, but that Philemon and his wife will be spared and blessed and grow old together and live on the great hill of Lystra in a temple. And they eventually become so old and blessed that they turn into the ancient linden trees of the area. So the ancient Greeks developed their own mythology around this ancient event, which Paul and Barnabas later have to deal with in the New Testament book of Acts. But you can see how both stories share the same roots. Even the prophet Ezekiel shares some similarities with the Greek version of the story when he says, "Now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore I did away with them, as you have seen." It's also ironic that the main sin of the Sodomites wasn't in fact sodomy, but rather that they had no concern for the needy and looked out for only themselves. So meanwhile, the 2 strangers, who the narrator now calls angels, arrive at the city of Sodom. We also learn that Abraham's nephew Lot and his family are now living within the city of Sodom, and this is probably why Abraham was especially concerned about the fate of the Sodomites. When the 2 angels arrive at the city, Lot is sitting in the city gate and spots them. Lot insists that they stay at his house for the night instead of sleeping in the city square. And later that night, the rape gangs show up and pound on Lot's door, yelling, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out so we can gang rape them." Lot, who is apparently as good as it gets in Sodom, offers the men the chance to rape his daughters instead, but the men don't want any of that. They want the angelic guests. They then try to push their way into the house, but the angels pull Lot back inside and then strike the mob with blindness. They tell Lot and his family to leave the city right away because they're about to destroy it. But Lot stalls and makes excuses again and again, until finally the angels grab Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters and drag them out of the city, with Lot bargaining with the angels the whole way. As they are fleeing, Lot's wife turns back towards Sodom and turns into a pillar of salt. She apparently just couldn't give up her life in Sodom, even though she knew that a life in Sodom would end in death. So Sodom and Gomorrah are destroyed with fire and brimstone, and from his dwelling, Abraham watches the dense smoke coming up from the horizon, and realizes that there weren't even 10 righteous people living in Sodom after all. Later, Lot and his daughters traveled to the mountains and lived in a cave. After a while, Lot's daughters realized that they would never get married, so they schemed together to get their dad drunk and have sex with him, so they could have kids and carry on the family name. The 2 sons that were born to them were named Moab and Ben-Ami. Moab sounds like the Hebrew word for from father, and Ben-Ami means son of my father's people. This is the origin story that the Israelites told about their distant and not very well-liked cousins, the Ammonites and Moabites. But going back to Abraham's story, sometime later he moved to Gerar in the region of the Negev wilderness. Another, my wife is my sister story takes place at this point, with Abraham claiming Sarah as his sister, and Abimelech, the king of Gerar, taking Sarah to be his concubine. But God comes to Abimelech in a dream and says to him, "You're a dead man because of the woman you've taken. She's a married woman." But Abimelech insists that he is innocent, and God agrees with him. So Abimelech returns Sarah and gives many gifts to Abraham as an apology. And he also scolds him for lying in the first place. But here, Abraham's dirty little secret comes out, and he confesses that Sarah really is his half-sister, saying to Abimelech that he only told half a lie. Abraham then prays for Abimelech and his people because God had caused them to be unable to have any children. And God hears the prayer and allows Abimelech and his people to have children again. Later, in chapter 26, a very similar story about Abimelech is told, but with Abraham's son Isaac and his wife Rebekah filling the roles of Abraham and Sarah. So finally, a year after Abraham's visit with the three strangers, Sarah becomes pregnant and gives birth to a son at the age of 90. She named her son Isaac, meaning laughter, and said, "God has brought me laughter, and everyone who hears about this will laugh with me. Who would have said to Abraham that Sarah would nurse children? Yet I have borne him a son in his old age." And so finally, after 25 years, God gives Abraham the son he'd promised him. Abraham's spiritual odyssey is now nearing its end, with the major events of his story forming a unique and intricate structure, the beginning running parallel to the end, with the center being the changing of Abraham's name and identity, surrounded by stories of blessing, promise, intercession, greed, deception, and ultimately the promise of the son fulfilled.